I think I might have figured out how Dedra plans to retaliate and undermine the rebels in Season 2 of Andor. And it's really based on a few shots we got in the trailer. If you haven't watched my breakdown video on the leaked trailer, I suggest you watch that first before coming back to this one. It'll just make a lot more sense when it comes to explaining this theory. So how Dedra is going to counter the growing rebel movement is really through the use of what I think is an off-the-books covert ops squad, an off-the-books team that will be led by Cyril to perform counter-insurgency and root out the hidden rebels, and there are a few signs that point to this direction. If you go back to the trailer, there are a few moments where we see groups of men wearing berets, and these are of course entirely new characters which would put their allegiances in question, whether they are for the Empire or for the rebels. But in the same trailer, we also get shots where we see Cyril hanging out with these guys. In fact, we see him leading a bunch of them through a sewer or tunnel of some sort. And this sort of leads me to conclude that whoever these guys are, they must be aligned with the Empire, with Cyril leading them. And I think there's a good reason for this. If we go back to a moment in Season 1 of Andor, we see Cyril saving Dedra from the Ferrix fallout. And while we don't see what happens after, you can bet that after this moment, Dedra will probably hire Cyril in some capacity. Given that Cyril has literally spent half the season chasing after Dedra and asking for a job to help track down Cassian, it just seems like the natural progression that Dedra would reward him with a posting of some sort. And this does seem to be the case, with the leaked trailer giving us several shots of Cyril dressed in some Imperial-esque clothing. But upon closer inspection, it's pretty clear that Cyril isn't wearing your typical Imperial or ISB attire. His uniform and clothing do point towards that direction and have certain elements of the standard Imperial attire such as the high collar, but it's not quite the same. Which leads me to conclude that while he might be employed by Dedra, perhaps working as an operative, it may not be in an official capacity. In fact, I would go as far as to argue that Cyril isn't an official ISB member. He could very well be working as Dedra's operative on the side, taking on information and fact-finding missions to help her in her investigation. And Cyril has demonstrated an aptitude for this sort of detective work, and we even see him in a detective-looking outfit in one of the shots of the trailer. We also see him liaise with an Imperial officer, being fed with cryptic messages and being stationed in an Imperial-controlled building. And so, now that we've established that Cyril is probably working for Dedra, Cyril leading the group of men wearing the berets will also be very telling, indicating to us that these guys are indeed Imperial operatives, but it also begs the question as to why they aren't in Imperial uniforms. In fact, their entire attire doesn't really reflect the Imperial sense of fashion at all. And so this descriptive difference may reflect that these men working for Cyril aren't official members of the Empire either, potentially being guns for hire or men recruited with the task of hunting down the enemies of the Empire. And there's a good reason why Dedra might change tactics in the way that she hunts for rebels. As the incident on Ferrix has already demonstrated, using stormtroopers and other Imperial officers to root out the rebels is a messy business. While stormtroopers may perform well on the front lines and in direct combat with the rebels, when it comes to investigative covert operations, they do come across as a little bit clunky. They just aren't trained in the ways of espionage and undercover work, and so what the failure at Ferrix might reveal to Dedra is that she needs a specialized group of men who can pull this off, who can blend into the crowd and perform counterintelligence against the rebels. And we've seen elements of this in the previous season with Attendant Corv. But even he proved to be rather inadequate for this type of job. And the truth is, while most ISB officers are good at investigating, field work is a whole other story. Something which requires a separate skill set, something which Cyril and the berets might be able to fill. And the scenes that we see in the trailer do also have the berets wielding weapons, so you know that they are more than capable. And if Dedra does indeed use these men as covert operatives to gather intelligence and hunt down the rebels, then it's going to be a challenging moment for Cassian and the rest of the team. And we might have already seen this happening in the trailer. If you go back to the trailer, there are quite a few shots where we see protests surrounding a beige Imperial building, a protest which quickly escalates into a gunfight between the rebels and the Imperials. But there is one shot in particular that does feature a man looking at all the action while wearing a beret, and so this could very well be one of the members of Cyril's team chasing and hunting down the rebels, leading to this climactic moment. And you can bet that the ISB and Dedra in particular are far from ready to give up on hunting Cassian, which is probably why we see Cassian and Cyril in the same place during the same event. It's also worth noting that having a covert op squad that is off the ISB book would be super advantageous for Dedra. Given that the rebels have an insider with Young spying for them within the ISB, having an op team off the books might come in handy, especially since Young can't report to Luthen what he doesn't know. Now, of course, Dedra and the rest of the ISB have yet to figure out that Young is a spy, but I have a feeling that that won't last for very long. In fact, in the trailer, we can even see Young taking the same elevator he used to meet Luthen back in Season 1, but this time it's a lot more chaotic. The camera is pretty erratic and Young himself has a blaster in hand, which either suggests that he's going to kill Luthen or that he has just been exposed and is now on the run. And I think that with Cyril and the Berets on the other end, they might be able to trace back and figure out that Young is a mole. It would sort of be a counter-espionage moment, exposing Young as a traitor, forcing him to run. And this is certainly an advantage that an off-the-books op team can provide. Not to mention, with Cyril's capability in investigative work, I wouldn't be surprised if he was the one who found out about Young's true nature. And given Andor's commitment to this Cold War era style of show with spy work and espionage, the Berets would fit into that theme just fine. The way in which they operate as the grunts carrying out orders from the ISB while performing intelligence work to root out the rebels would make a lot of sense. Besides, the Berets do really remind me of certain real-life militaries, especially the fashion sense of certain militaries during the Cold War. And I think a switch in tactics would be just right for Dedra, also demonstrating how smart she is by adapting and adjusting her tactics accordingly. So that is how I think Dedra plans to use Cyril and the Berets to counter the growing rebel network. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.